Welcome to session 5 of our 5x7 snapshot on the role of the clinical chaplain in military medical ethics. In the previous videos, we've outlined the way in which uniformed clinical chaplains can be champions of several crucially important dimensions of military medical ethics, dimensions which are often under-identified, underrepresented, even perhaps undervalued among their peer professionals, with the exception perhaps of their peers who are studied in and dedicated to the ethics of care. Specifically, we mentioned the ethical importance of revisiting epistemological positioning in health encounters. Are we sure that we have an adequate picture and approach to what we think it is that we see? Are there any gaps or oversimplifications in our conceptions of what the problems we are facing seem to be? Are we becoming lost in projective identification? What are the implications of the positions we're taking towards our patients in terms of now limited actions? We also mentioned the important ethical contribution of chaplains in maintaining a teleological vision in health encounters and deliberative ethics. What is the impact of our decision-making in terms of the long-term well-being and destiny of our patients and their families and their communities, many of whom are experiencing a crisis, and yet all of whom, if they are still alive, are capable of profound reorientation and growth during and also following this time. In our impatience, or in our unrestrained instincts to fix everything, or in our self-assurance about our roles and our hoped-for outcomes? Are we unnecessarily interfering with the ability of our patients and their families to come together to be as active as possible in their destiny, even in the midst of a crisis? Is it even possible that we're maintaining a limited view of human flourishing? For instance, mistaking flourishing for the absence or complete mitigation of suffering. Aristotle used two terms for well-being, by the way. Idonia referred to the presence of comfort and pleasure, and the absence of suffering. Eudaimonia, or evdaimonia, depending on where you learned your Greek, which I'm afraid we've all a bit lost in many of our public discourses, refers to something much closer to the fulfilling of one's destiny, which of course assumes contact with adversity, and its accompanying, clarifying, reorienting, and strengthening effects. Lastly, we focused on ecological and systemic dimensions of ethics in the military medical setting in some of our previous sessions. In the midst of treating individual pathology, are we taking seriously the ecological and systemic realities of our patients, which may impact them in elusive, intangible, but very powerful and even fossilized or fossilizing ways? Let's transition one final time now to address the ways in which chaplains may be useful to multidisciplinary teams within their expertise of approaching and holding conversations which feature strong religious themes. I'll not be able to take the time to explore every possible context in which such themes arise. However, I'll focus on the general manner in which uniformed clinical chaplains work such themes in almost any context. Specifically, in a simultaneously person-centered, pluralistically competent, and policy-directed manner. I'll take each of these in turn. First, clinical chaplains work with religious themes in the medical setting in a person-centered manner. I'd like to address this by responding to two occasional comments that I hear related to uniformed clinical chaplains and their potential efficacy in addressing religious themes arising in ethical consults within the MHS. First, we aren't sure whether to include the chaplain because her or his religious tradition is different than the religious tradition of the family or patient in question. And second, we aren't sure whether to include the chaplain because she or he depends primarily on theological beliefs to inform moral and ethical decisions, and that approach will end or obstruct more broadly principled pluralistic dialogue. Frankly, I believe that both of these positions toward clinical chaplains, which may have been formed through some real experiences or formed through a series of calcified impressions, or both, are incomplete when one takes into consideration the training and professional competencies of clinical chaplaincy. So, to address the first, chaplains are trained to maintain a person-centered approach to any clinical consultation. That is, a clinical chaplain typically seeks to synergistically explore the material that arises with a patient or family as it is, on its own terms, without attempting to import his or her own perspective and presuppositions into the dialogue. This is a simple question of therapeutic bracketing, which almost every helping professional must employ to some degree when developing a helping bond. In their graduate studies, chaplains become quite familiar with all major world religions. In the military, chaplains become even more familiar since they're professional liaisons between their commands and civilian religious leaders. Also, they have roles helping people of all religions in their units to obtain the necessary religious accommodations to observe their faith while serving. They even have roles in training and equipping uniformed lay leaders from all religions to serve alongside them in supporting the religious freedoms of everyone in their unit. Indeed, there could generally not be a more qualified professional in the MAHS environment to work with religious themes as they arise in the ethics consultation than the chaplain, no matter how much might separate the religious contexts of those themes from the chaplain's own theological assumptions and religious tradition. If, and I say if, the ethics body sincerely wants to take the religious themes that are arising seriously and not find some way to minimize them or extract them from deliberation, then they almost must include a chaplain. Certain aspects of reproductive health care, end-of-life care, transplantation, vaccination, pharmaceutical design, and more can represent serious challenges to conscience for people of many different faith traditions and spiritual foundations. In the military, the chaplain is the constitutionally provided agent to ensure First Amendment religious freedom, and they should be employed as often as possible in such roles within the MHS. I have a similar response to the concern about chaplains relying on a God commands foundational perspective as a primary or sole foundational perspective on all ethical issues. The truth is that all people, no matter what their position on a multidisciplinary ethics committee, must to some degree bracket their foundational cosmological and anthropological assumptions when working in a pluralistic environment, in order to share at least a reasonable context with others in the discussion. Why anyone would assume that all chaplains are incapable of that is simply beyond me. As Tris Engelhard mentioned many years ago, in a pluralistic environment, we always tend to sacrifice nuance to gain consensus. That is to say, we all must zoom out from some of our most closely held beliefs and foundations in order to get on the same page with everyone else in the room or everyone else in the society. Thanks for tuning in to these 5 short videos. This one might be running just a bit long. I hope that I've been able to, with some clarity and with some sophistication, address the unique contributive potential of the uniformed clinical chaplain participating in multidisciplinary committees and dialogues related to clinical and research ethics in contemporary military medicine.